G'day mates and matettes, it's Cunt and I'm ready to finish talking about Ken Ham. Finally. Oh, how does the new setup sound, by the way? I've got an actual mic, so you no longer have to deal with the poor quality of my headset, and you get to hear my sultry voice much clearer. Anyway, I guess I have to stop talking about my hopeful improvement in quality and get back to Ken Ham. So, roll the intro.
My intentions are pure, but I'm just a bit blunt. And to a few select people, I'm the world's greatest cunt.
And by the way, when you then go to the Bible and you read that God created everything in 6 days, and the Hebrew word yom for day can have a number of different meanings, but whenever it's qualified with the word evening or morning or number or night, it means an ordinary day. And that's how it's qualified in Genesis 1, which means God created everything in 6 days.
Actually, I'd argue it means the parable of the creation in the Bible was stated to be 6 days, therefore having no effect on reality. But that requires a shred of intellectual honesty, unfortunately for you, Ken, ergo you're a young earth creationist. Please, continue telling me how the parables of the Bible are not indicative of reality in your own special way.
And then, as you go through those genealogies, you learn that Adam had a son, Seth, when he was 103 years old, and then Seth then lived 100 and plus years and had a son, Enosh, and then Enosh had a son, Cain. It tells you at what age they had these sons, to Jared, to Enoch, to Methuselah, to Lamech, to Noah. And you go down through these genealogies, we get to Abraham, and then we get to the time of Christ, and then we come to the present. You add them all up, you get about 6,000 years.
Whoa! What an amazing scientific way of determining the age of the Earth! I'm going to be honest, Ken, I don't even think it's possible to spit in the face of empirical data more than by adding the ages of characters in a fable to find the Earth's age. Do yourself a favour and go for an old Earth model. It'll do wonders for your accuracy, despite it still being an unfalsifiable mess.
That's why I believe that the Earth and universe is only thousands of years old. It's not millions of years old.
Oh, I know, Ken. And it's why I don't respect you in the slightest.
In fact, think about it. Where do we get the origin of our week from? Because you have a 7-day week, I presume. We don't have a 10-day week. We have a 7-day week. We get the Earth from the rotation, the day from the rotation of the Earth. We get the month from the Earth and the Moon, that relationship, and the year from the Earth and the Sun. But the 7-day week actually comes from the Bible.
Yeah, it does, Ken. But just because the idea of a 7-day week stuck doesn't mean the source material has any scientific merit. Otherwise, I'd be a creationist because I use Linnaean taxonomic ranks and names when looking at how animals are classified. But I'm not, even though Linnaeus was. See how that works?
God made everything in 6 days and rested for one. God didn't take millions of years. If he did, we'd have an interesting week.
Was that an attempt at a joke? Or do you legitimately think the week would have come from the Bible regardless of whether or not 7 days simply worked well? I honestly can't tell with you anymore.
And then we come to the age of the Earth. And people say, well, what about all those dating methods? Secular scientists say the Earth is 5 billion years old and the universe is 15 billion years old, and they have all these dating methods. Actually, most people don't realize that the majority of dating methods, 90% of them, actually contradict the millions and billions of years. You're only told about the 10% that seem to support the millions and billions of years.
10%? Things are different ages, Ken. But the way the age of the Earth is calculated requires looking at the oldest things on Earth, specifically the oldest meteorites that must have impacted the fledgling Earth. Given that using uranium-lead dating, they were dated to 4.54 billion years old. The Earth must be at least that old, given radiometric decay rates are a constant in physics, not variable like you creationists like to say. Anything that is not that old doesn't limit the age of the Earth, just the time that they must have appeared on Earth. Any dating method that relies on living organisms, a la a large portion of your list, will never give you billions of years because life, at least multicellular life, doesn't go back that far. The rest of that list is just you not understanding science. Carbon-14 in meteorites? Come on, Ken. That will never give you an accurate age over 50,000 years, and that's been explained to you countless times.
And for instance, there's lots of examples like this. Salt, you can measure the rate at which salt is building up in the oceans. And so here's the way in which evolutionists would work. They would say, salt has been building up for millions of years, and they say that the sea is actually 3 billion years old, because the origin of the Earth supposedly 4.5 billion years ago. About 3 billion years ago, you get water on the Earth, so the oceans are supposed to be about 3 billion years. But actually, when you look at the rate at which salt is building up, if you assume the oceans were distilled water, no salt to start with, and you might say, how do you know that? You don't, but that's the point. All dating methods have assumptions about the past when you weren't there. But if you assume that, there's only enough salt to count for 62 million years. You might say, well, do you believe the oceans are 62 million years old? No, I believe they're much younger. I believe they're 6,000 years old.
You expose the fallacy in your own reasoning just by the assumption you make that the oceans are 6,000 years old. Some things are not constants and have been different in the past, Ken. That's how we account for the fact that if you extrapolated the rate of salt being dissolved into water, you only get 62 million years. That's why we don't use variable processes to find the Earth's age. We use constants like radiometric dating. Do you understand that, Ken?
In actual fact, there could have been salt there to start with. Noah's flood would have disrupted the amount of salt in the ocean. But regardless, this contradicts the 3 billion years.
Not in the slightest, Ken. You're just willfully ignorant enough to ignore what actual science tells us.
There are other examples, like in Australia, at a Crinum mine, Dr. Andrew Snelling is involved in dating in regard to this, but mining engineers drilled down and they found a basalt layer, which is like a lava flow with wood in it, trees in it, so the basalt covered the trees. Now, when they dated the basalt using potassium argon, it dated to 45 million years old, but when they dated the wood using carbon dating, it dated to 45,000 years old. Now, 45,000-year-old wood in 45 million-year-old basalt, there's a problem there.
Yeah, and without looking it up, I can tell you using carbon dating to date something older than 50,000 years is where you're going wrong there. Now, I am a serious believer that you should be assumed to be a dumbass over a con man, but your mistakes in carbon dating leave me no choice but to believe that you are intentionally deceiving your audience, because the creationist misunderstandings of carbon-14 are fucking famous, yet somehow you still cock it up. Please, learn from your mistakes, and don't make such obvious errors. At least make me research a bit, Christ.
At Mount St Helens that I mentioned before, a lava dome started to form in the 80s, actually. And in 1994, it was sampled for dating. And Dr. Steve Austin, a creation scientist, a geologist, did this. When he took the whole rock and dated it using potassium argon, it dated at 0.35 million years. When he used the mineral amphibole, it was 0.9 million years. When he used the pyroxene concentrate, it was 2.8 million years. But wait a minute, that explosion was on May 18th, 1980, and the lava dome formed in the 80s. It can't be 0.35 million years old.
According to Encyclopedia Britannica, potassium argon dating can only be used on samples as young as 20,000 years, not 100 years. Dr. Austin used a dating method that was not suitable for the rock he was testing. That's deliberately dishonest. He, as a geologist, should have known better. My only conclusion is that he lied in order to deceive people that science cannot be trusted to determine the age of the Earth.
And one of the things they have found is this. They found that when you get the magma, the lava that comes out of the Earth's mantle, when you use potassium argon dating, and you're assuming there was no argon there to start with, and the potassium broke down radioactively to argon, but when it comes up from the Earth, they find there's already argon there, which means it makes it look old.
That's why we have error bars, Ken. And we control for the amount of argon that was in the rock before radioactive decay. This is well known. You're not shining light on anything. This is like saying that putting chemicals in your food is bad when literally everything is chemicals. You're capitalizing on people's lack of understanding, and it's honestly disgusting.
And so they can figure out why the dating method doesn't work. But the point is, when they don't know how old a rock is and how it formed and weren't there to see it all and so on, they assume the dating method works. But when they know what happened, they can figure out why it doesn't work. People don't realize that sort of thing.
No, when they know what happened, they can figure out how to control the variables that would make a rock where they didn't know the age inaccurate when it's dated. If controlling for extraneous variables is off the table, the entirety of science goes with it.
So many other things that we could look at in regard to this. And then, even when it comes down to, and we've run out of time, so I'll just skim through a little bit of this, people say, well, how did the different races of people come about?
They were exposed to different environmental selection pressures that caused different random mutations to be favoured. Oh, back in my happy place. Biology.
Well, actually, from a biblical perspective, we're all descendants of Adam and Eve, so there's only one race. In fact, when the human genome used observational science, mapping the human genome around the world, they said, there's only one race. Of course there is.
You do know a race is equivalent to like a breed in a dog, right? Nobody thinks the different races of humans are different species. Even the most racist of organizations think they're still Homo sapiens. While races are quite arbitrary in terms of biology, they still exist in social constructs, so I think we have another case of that word doesn't mean what you think it means. Oh, and I know the subtitle of Darwin's book says races in the context of species. Sue me, he's not a fucking god. That isn't what the word means.
Well, why do you have distinct features in people like Australian Aborigines and Eskimos and Indians and so on? The Bible tells us about an event called the Tower of Babel, which caused people to split up, and as they moved away from each other, different combinations of genes in different groups depending on who married who and so on, and you end up with different people groups, not different races.
Holy shit, he nearly grasped evolution right there. While the Tower of Babel evidently didn't happen, that, plus random mutations in the presence of selection pressures, is a serviceable, if simplistic, explanation of evolution by natural selection. But that isn't evidence that there are no races. It's an explanation as to why people diversified in their appearance. As I said, races are a social construct based on the appearance and geographical location of different humans.
And even with skin color, everyone has the same basic color. You have a pigment called melanin. Melanin is a brown pigment. You can have a lot of it and be very dark, a little bit and be very light. It's just the genetic diversity that God put there. Adam and Eve were probably middle brown with a whole mixture of genes, and some of you got genes for a lot of melanin, some of you got genes for not as much melanin. Very, very easy to understand.
Again, so close to understanding evolution, but not quite there. That being said, you did make a case against all forms of racism, which I appreciate, even if it was accidental. What you didn't do is explain how races don't exist. Not that it really means anything to your argument, but hey, I'm a stickler for truth. That's like me saying biological sex doesn't exist, because we just express different amounts of different hormones and we're all still human. It's a stupid line of reasoning.
And so, what I'm saying to us is, hey, you realize whether it's biology, biochemistry, geology, anthropology, astronomy, observational science confirms the Bible's history.
It really, really doesn't. And that concludes the series. I'll be back with a more varied repertoire in the coming weeks, so if you want to see that, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Feel free to rate the video or leave your feedback in the comments. It all helps. And don't hesitate to correct any errors I made. I'm just grateful for it. That's it for today, so I guess I will see you next Thursday.